97.3 ESPN's John McMullen, who was at the NovaCare Center one final time as they close the mandatory minicamp sessions, and the Eagles will be off now till training camp on July the 23rd, John. As we now know, the Eagles, anybody get in trouble today as they left the NovaCare complex?
Not that I know of, but I'm waiting for the text. So you never know. It's always a scary proposition for the coaches. And hopefully Doug talked about it a bit. Hopefully they learn from what happened last year and they make good decisions, because it's about, as he mentioned, I think this was prudent. A lot of people go the angle of you're representing the Philadelphia Eagles. And he said that, but he also kind of highlighted you're representing yourself. And really, when you think about these types of incidents, yeah, it gives the Eagles or any other NFL team a black eye if something happens, but it hurts you more personally than it does the organization. So he hammered that home, and hopefully it works.
Yeah, and we know that they'll be done now for about the next month or so. But that doesn't mean they're going to just get away from football. They have some plans. I just heard Damian during the update talking about Carson Wentz and some people taking the trip. They're going to be continuing to try to, keep the continuity together.
Yeah, he's going to have a bunch of people out to North Dakota. I think the guys would have preferred San Diego, where Sam Bradford used to take them. But nonetheless, it's about sort of getting together and doing a couple things. It's about football, but it's also about, the camaraderie aspect of it and getting closer as teammates. But certainly, when you have all these new receivers and you just started to develop that chemistry, the last thing you want to do is slam on the brakes for 5 weeks. So everybody's invited as far as all the skill position people. Zach Ertz specifically said he's going, and I'm sure most of them are. We'll see how many do. But it's something that's become sort of in vogue in the entire NFL. A lot of quarterbacks do that in the offseason.
Hey, just your impressions of year 2 Carson Wentz, how far he has come. I know the first question today was asked about Isaac Seumalo and Vaitai, that they're ahead of where they were last year. But when you look at Carson Wentz, he's the most important guy. Just a more mature, more polished guy. Is that evident? Do you see that he made tremendous growth from year 1 to year 2?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just circumstance. As I always pointed out, at this time last year, he was the third-string quarterback. Even though he was obviously still a high-profile guy as the number 2 overall pick, he wasn't expected nor was considered the leader of this team. This time around, he's both. He's expected to be, and he is the leader. So from that standpoint alone, he's had to sort of make those adjustments. But I think he's always been sort of a natural leader that people gravitate towards. I don't think anyone has a problem standing behind Carson Wentz. And, I think he sees this team and sees the position. And I think he's, more importantly to me, is he's played better this week in minicamp than he did in OTAs.
Yeah, I know he's a very important figure in all this. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, John, about how, they got all the necessary goods to put around him. When you look at this offense, a year later from where we were at this time last year, way different. Do you think, I know they don't do a lot, it's mini camps, but going into training camp, do you see a significantly upgraded offense?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's the one thing you can gauge, really, at these OTAs and the mini camp is sort of the skill position people. And on the defensive side, it's, the corners and the safeties, and really 7-on-7s is at least you can see the athleticism and the skill level. It's much improved on the offensive side of the ball. You didn't see nearly as many drops. I can't even think of Alshon Jeffery dropping a football. I didn't see him drop one. this entire spring. And if you think about the Eagles and what they've been the last number of years, I mean, between him and Torrey Smith specifically, and then you had the huge upgrade in play from Nelson Aguilar, it's been a much better group, and that's with Jordan Matthews missing essentially every practice except one. He was out there for the first practice, and then they shut him down with the knee tendonitis. So, yeah, it's a much improved group.
John McMullen with us, and I know, John, that Doug was asked about Alshon Jeffery and if he remembered him even dropping a pass during these OTAs of this mandatory minicamp. But to Nelson Aguilar's improvement or perceived improvement, what do you think the biggest difference has been for him, John, and why do you think that light bulb or that switch has gone on for him?
Well, I don't know if it has gone on. I mean, we have to wait. We do have to wait to see in training camp when the pads are on and sort of the corners and people can get a little more physical and how he takes being on the second team. Remember, he's been on the first team unit for the majority of the spring because of the Matthews injury. So I think part of it is he's no longer expected to be the guy. The guy is now Jeffery, and to a lesser extent Smith, and then you get to Matthews, and then you get to Aguilar. So instead of, when he was taken as a first-round pick, the expectations were huge that he was going to be a big part of this offense. Now everybody's labeled him a bust, and they think he's a lost cause. So there's no pressure, and he's a guy who hasn't handled pressure well in the past. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the second part is he's sort of gotten to that place in his life where he says, screw it, I'm just going to play. I'm not going to worry about the outside noise. And so far it's worked for him. We got a long way to go. But he's played very well. He has made a big-time play in just about every practice this spring, including today, made a spectacular catch on a post pattern. That was essentially the play of the day.
The risky business approach. Sometimes you just got to say, okay, I won't finish that. John McMullen with us. So earlier in the show, John, Barrett Brooks gave us the prediction that Chance Warmack will be the starter at left guard, saying that he's more talented than Barber and more experienced than Sayamalo, combined with, of course, that Jeff Stoutland reunion. What's your reaction to hearing Barrett Brooks say, hey, I think Chance Warmack will be the starter at left guard?
Well, I never say never, but I don't see it happening. I mean, it's pretty evident that this team wants the starter to be Isaac Sayamalo. Look, there's no doubt about, as far as the physical gifts, you're talking about a former top 10 pick. Yeah, they're better than Sayamalo's and Alan Barber. But for whatever reason, they haven't developed the way they needed to in Tennessee. He's trying to kickstart his career now in Philadelphia. Spent most of the spring on second and third teams. To me, it looks very, very slow off the ball. I think that's the issue, and that's the biggest issue, and that hasn't changed. And right now, look, this guy's fighting for a roster spot before you start talking about being a starter. So, while Barrett obviously understands offensive line play, from what went on over these essentially 12 practices, I don't see that happening at this point.
We're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, he covers the Eagles. He covers the NFL nationally, writes a national column for FanRag Sports NFL. And, we haven't talked a lot about defense because it seems that when Doug's at the podium, not a lot of defensive questions are asked of Doug. But I'm going to ask you about, when you look at the defensive side of the ball, realistically, they got Derek Barnett. They had problems in the secondary last year, but most of the defense is very similar, right? The linebackers and other than Barnett, the line. Well, I guess they lost Logan too. You substituted Jernigan for Logan. The two safeties will be the same. Do you see a defense though in year number 2 that understands more? They went from a 3-4 to a 4-3, and maybe that was talked about last year. That they went from 3-4 back to 4-3. Do you see a more comfortable group of the guys who are returning?
Well, I think the veterans are more comfortable on both sides of the ball because, it's the second year in each system. Jim Schwartz on defense, Doug Peterson's on offense. I think that's just a natural part of it. But as far as the defense as a whole, I mean, I wrote about it today on 973ESPN.com. It's sort of like a duality to that defense because most of the best players on this team are on the defensive side of the ball. You talk about Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Jordan Hicks and Malcolm Jenkins. And when you look to the offense, really you start with Lane Johnson, Jason Peters, maybe Alshon Jeffery gets to that point. But the best players on this football team are on the defensive side. On the other hand, the one gaping hole on this football team is on the defensive side, and that's the cornerback position. And right now, that's not good. I mean, Rasul Douglas has sort of fallen back. He's had a bad minicamp, to be honest, on field, getting a lot of penalties. Remember, if you remember, Mike, I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, one of the most difficult things for young cornerbacks to do in this league is to adjust because they can be more physical at the college level. Well, they had referees out there at minicamp, and they were throwing flags on Rasul Douglas like you wouldn't believe because he was so grabby. And that's the nature of it. That's what the NFL is today, and that's why so many young quarterbacks struggle. And all of a sudden, C.J. Smith is starting to get some first-team reps. Aaron Grimes, first-team reps in the slot. That's not good. So this team, and Doug mentioned it today, I asked the question, he even gave that little kind of quip at the end and said, maybe the roster's not settled. I don't have it in front of me. But I think this team has to look outside the organization for some help at corner.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN, talking about the secondary and the issues that the Eagles have there. So to you, that sounds the alarm bell that C.J. Smith and Aaron Grimes are getting those reps with the first team. That's a big red flag, not the ones that they're doing the drills around, but a red flag for you that they're not where they want to be.
That was one of the things, too, that you asked about that today, John, at the press conference, that, they were mixing different guys in. But if you're mixing in guys and you're getting under Grimes and C.J. Smith, I don't know. That's not a good sign for the guys they got at the top of that depth chart.
Yeah, and it's like you want to look at the doctors and Sidney Jones and say, please get this guy out as quickly as humanly possible.
Put me back together.
Aaron Grimes is one of my favorite players on this team. He really is because he competes so hard, but he's limited size-wise. He's strictly an inside slot cornerback. And it's when those two guys are getting first-team reps, it's not a positive. There's no way to spin it as a positive.
No, and you know what? When they go to training camp, it's going to be Mills. Is Patrick Robinson, are they going to put him at the top, or do you see Rasul Douglas or no depth chart? I mean, how are they going to run that thing?
Well, no, I mean, Mills and Robinson have been the starters throughout pretty much the entire spring, and that'll continue. And Rasul has originally, at the start of things, came in the nickel. And when he did, he played outside, and then Jalen Smith would go in the slot. But as I said, Douglas has struggled mightily over the past couple of days. C.J. Smith was getting his reps with the first team outside. When Grimes got first-team reps, he would play the slot, and Mills would stay outside. So they're trying to mix and match, but when you don't have the bodies to mix and match, it's difficult.
Yeah, and how about on the other side of the ball where not as I don't want to say lack of talent, but a situation that's kind of up in the air, too, on the depth chart is at running back where, Pumphrey, Smallwood, Blunt, Sproles. Do you get a better sense of what Smallwood's role may or may not be on this team?
Well, I think Smallwood's role is going to be the backup to LeGarrette Blount, essentially. So that means LeGarrette's going to be the starting running back.
You're not getting a lot of touches,
back.
right? In other words, you're not getting a lot of touches.
That's true, offhand. But say LeGarrette gets injured, I don't think they would necessarily go to Darren Sproles as a backup. I think then it would be Wendell being the main back, and they would still use Sproles and Pumphrey situationally. So while I tell you he's probably fourth on the depth chart, they're playing different positions. And I think they realize that Blunt's going to be the guy, and his backup's going to be Smallwood, and then Sproles and Pumphrey are going to be the situational guys.
Yep, it looks like, as we kind of talked about before, there are a lot of added weapons on the offense. We've got about 3 weeks now to kind of let it marinate, and then they'll be back July 23rd at the NovaCare Complex for training camp.
Now, John, Mike talked about year number 2 for Carson Wentz, but it's also year number 2 for Doug Peterson and handling these OTAs and the mandatory mini camps and stuff. Did Doug give any indication how comfortable he is in year number 2?
Yeah, I mean, he's more comfortable, and it's one of those jobs. It's like when people talk about president of the United States, there's no real people talk about experience. There's no real experience to where you could be president. And it's really similar, even if you're an offensive coordinator in this league, defensive coordinator, there's no real experience that enables you to be a head coach. You sort of got to learn on the fly. Everybody does it. Doug did it, and everybody before him did it. Everybody after him will do it. So, yeah, as you get more familiar with it, as you get more comfortable, you feel a lot more confident. And it could be as simple as logistics and getting schedules down and understanding what you want to do and what you want to accomplish. So all of that, he's been through it once. You sort of tweak the mistakes, and, I think there's going to be a natural improvement there.
Hey, real quick, we haven't talked a lot about this at all throughout the mini camps and any of the OTAs, but is the return game, the returners, are they going to be different this year? I mean, a lot of times rookies who don't have a lot of roles in the offense, you see them kind of turn into return men. Do you see Sproles still being the punt guy who, in the kick, he doesn't do the kicks, but, Smallwood does the kicks last year. But do you see some new guys being in the mix there?
Yeah, I mean, they have a ton of guys who can return. As you mentioned, Darren's going to be the main punt returner. And the kickoff returner for now, Wendell Smallwood, has been running with the first team, and sort of Nelson Aguilar has been the up back. But they have Torrey Smith, who's been one of the great returners in this league that can return punts and kicks if you need them. So they have a lot of bodies they could look at. But
and that's something Aguilar did too, right? At USC, he was a pretty good return man.
Yeah, he was, and as I said, he was the guy. So sort of how they do special teams drill, they have two guys deep. Smallwood will take the first rep and take the kickoff, and Aguilar will be the up guy, and then Aguilar will take the kickoff, and Wendell will act as the up guy. So it seems like they're the top two. At least as we started. But as I said, Torrey Smith is a starting receiver. But if you need him, he's been really, really good at it in the past. You can always put him in there. He's also returned punts. They have Pumphrey working on punt returns every day. But it's going to be Darren Sproles. Obviously, he's one of the great punt returners of all time. So you're not going to pull the plug on that.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and we say the NFL never takes a break. Well, we lied. It's taking a 3-week hiatus, but if something happens, of course, we'll plug into John. You can always follow him at JF McMullen and the NFL columnist over at FanRag Sports NFL on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. All right, have a good hibernation.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.